Hello, and welcome to today's panel about the documentary film Last of the Right Whales, and by extension, about the critically endangered North Atlantic right whale. My name is Latif Nasser. I'm co-host of the public radio show and podcast RadioLab, as well as the host of the Netflix series Connected. Today, we will be discussing this particular type of whale, why it is special, the challenges that it is facing to survive, and what we can all do to help. We have a wonderful panel lined up, but before we get to that panel, let's watch the trailer. So this is the trailer for The Last of the Right Whales.
It's not the well-known whale. It's not the whale of Moby Dick, and it's not the humpback whale.
We have a very limited view on right whales. They're so rare, we don't understand them. And their decline tells us what is happening to this ocean.
1, then 2, then 6 dead whales, and the death count hasn't stopped.
With only hundreds left in existence, they've suffered a terrible blow.
We're at a crisis moment here.
The baseline of this ecosystem is changing. If the whales lose the plankton, they're dead.
So we're trying to look for layers of food to explain why the whale is feeding right close to the surface.
2 meters!
The real culprit in this is rope.
Once you have a vertical line and a whale in the same area, there's a risk.
So those are previous entanglement scars, previous boat strike scar.
And so we're causing all this. So we have to do something. If this happened to a human, what would we do?
Oh my goodness! Stop right here, there's one right next to us. This is the sort of stuff I live for.
How lucky are we, guys?
How important are these animals to us? That's really what this comes down to.
Oh my God.
Doesn't get much closer than that, eh? This is one of the greatest animal ethical issues of our time.
We should leave no trace, and the traces that we do leave should be good ones.
Give nature a chance and it'll come right back. That's what we're asking for, is to give the right whale a chance to show what it's made of.
So that's the film, and this is the panel. Joining me today is the film's producer and director, Nadine Pequeneza, along with Sean Brillant, who is the senior conservation biologist of marine programs with Canadian Wildlife Federation, or CWF. Moira Brown is a senior scientist with the Canadian Whale Institute, also a member of the Campobello Whale Rescue Team, which you see in the film. Gretchen Fitzgerald, who is the National Programs Director with Sierra Club Canada Foundation. And finally, Patrick Ramage, Senior Director of Outreach and Program Collaboration at the International Fund for Animal Welfare, or IFAW. So that was a lot of words, but some very exciting, brilliant people here. Including one who has it in the label. So thank you all for being here. And I should say at the top that all of those organizations that I named have partnered with Nadine for this sort of impact campaign around this film. But before I think most of my questions, I should say two things up top. First, I know very little about right whales. I kind of came to this sort of almost like just totally ignorant. I don't know anything, which is why I'm so excited to do this, and I agreed to do this because I have so many questions and I want to ask so many questions. And the second thing that I was going to say, I've actually forgot, so I'm just going to go straight. I think I want to start with Nadine and this film. So Nadine, your background is in social justice films on land. Why and how did you choose to do this film about whales?
Yeah, I just want to say though, before we get started, Latif, now that you've watched the film, you know a lot more about right whales.
I do.
Good. So
I learned a lot.
That's great. No, but you're absolutely right. I've done mostly social justice films, so films about human rights. And I think the way I approach this film has a lot to do with the way that I've done my other films. You know, those are stories about people trying to right the wrongs that we do to each other. And this film is really about people trying to right the wrongs that we've done to the North Atlantic right whale. And, you know, living in the city, I'm from Toronto, and it's really easy to become disconnected from nature and from the natural world. And so by doing this film, I think you see the connection that the people in the film have with the whales and how it impacts them. And then it becomes very clear how we impact the right whales, because we don't just listen, we're part of it. And so everything we do, from, you know, how we source our food to how we deliver the goods that we buy, all of these things impact this species' ability to survive. And so that's sort of what drew me to this topic.
Which makes good sense. Although when I was sort of imagining you're jumping into this new kind of film, like a nature wildlife type film, which I don't know, maybe you had done before, but it didn't look like you had. Like this one, you chose a very difficult, like a high degree of difficulty. You even get a little meta about it in the documentary, where you kind of talk about there's so much you can't film, potentially either because you either because you were going to like potentially harm the whale, or because it's just physically impossible. Like you can't get to a certain place or see a certain thing. Or what can you just talk about how challenging was that as a filmmaker?
Yeah, that was sort of naivete on my part when I dove into this. I didn't really know what I was in for. I mean, I knew that they were critically endangered because the film actually started with one of the protagonists, Nick Hawkins, who's a wildlife photographer. And he had gone out and got special permission to get close to the whales because they're critically endangered. You can't approach within a certain distance. It varies whether you're in Canada or the United States, but they want to keep a buffer, a protection zone around the whales, obviously, because there's less than 400 left. So that was the first obstacle. But I thought with the permits, and they're very well surveyed, although there's few of them. There's aerial surveys, there's boat surveys, there's acoustics out there. There's a number of ways to sort of keep track of where the whales are at. So I thought, you know, we could get there. And Nick had devised this special surface submarine that he used to actually try and get footage of the whales underwater, some sort of imagery. But it was all very tough because, you know, they do move around a lot, and they're attracted to plankton-rich waters, which is where they feed, which makes the visibility is very poor underwater. So it was tricky. But I think in the end, you know, working with scientists, because originally we were just going to film in the Gulf of St. Lawrence, but we ended up going along the whole range. So all the way from Florida up to the Gulf of St. Lawrence, and working with scientists in all of the different habitats, we were able to get the kind of access that we needed to get the imagery that you see in the film.
I wouldn't have known this had not for on my show we did a segment about whales, and it was sort of illuminating in the way that like I realized like how frustrating that is. Like you can go out and you can not see anything, and that's like it's just as a filmmaker it must be sort of maddening. There are times that, I mean, unlike, you know, any other documentary film, someone says they're going to show up, they're going to show up. Whale, it's not so easy to work with.
Yeah, you have to be pretty zen. I got zen about it, you know, after day 5, 6 out on the ocean and not seeing anything, or bad weather. That was often what kept me back. Yeah. So there were lots of those challenges.
Well, let me open it up to everybody, and that was actually the second thing I was going to say, is that I don't want this to feel like a rote Q&A. So just everybody just jump in and jump even if you have questions for each other, or jump all over however you want. So I'll just put a question out there, which is that so maybe the first question I have for everybody is like, Tell me about right whales. Why are they called right whales? What makes them special? Why, out of all the creatures that you could possibly study, that you could possibly care for as much as you do this one, why this one?
I got to tackle that.
We all like
Please.
a challenge.
So the right whale was given its name by the whalers. It was the right whale to kill. So it's had a tough background, and this dates back to when the colonists first came to the United States. Now United States in the 1600s. It actually dates back to the Basque whalers in 1000 AD over in the Bay of Biscay. So this whale has been the target of whalers for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. And it was called the right whale to kill because it was coastal in its distribution. It floated after death. And it had a V-shaped blow, so you could be busy doing something else on land. I mean, picture Cape Cod, and you're farming corn on Cape Cod or doing something on Cape Cod in the 1600s. And instead of lifeguard stands, there is a stand on the beach, but they're looking for V-shaped blows in the springtime. And they see that V-shaped blow, and they can row out in a boat, harpoon the whale, and let the tide or the wind or the current bring that whale back to shore. And now they've got oil for their lamps and baleen for leaf springs, and oh my gosh, corset stays. Don't we wish we still wore those? All kinds of, it was the tensile steel or plastic of the time, right? So it was a hugely valuable animal. And so even after whalers got more sophisticated with faster boats, the right whale was so valuable, they would still try to hunt one if they found it. So the species was thought to be commercially extinct. 1700s, 1800s, early 1900s. And then there was a resurgence in the hunting around 1880 into the early 1900s. And so, now we know that, right whales are coastal in their distribution. The whalers in Long Island, the more recent whalers in Long Island in the early 1900s called the mothers dry skins. So they would take the calf first because the mother had just migrated up from Florida. She hadn't been feeding all winter herself, but she had been nursing a calf. And they would get more oil out of the calf than the mother. Oh. And so you can this was all before biologists existed. So we've been scrambling to learn about these whales from a physiological standpoint and other biological standpoints for decades, because most of these whales were killed off before biologists existed.
Well, I presume that the reason you all are interested is not because you're all wearing corsets made of the baleen right now, but yeah. What about?
Wait, can you see my corset in this camera angle?
Yeah. So what about these? Like besides that, they have. I mean, it seems like they have this sort of. They were born, at least to us, with this target on their backs. Like what about them makes them special to you and worth studying?
The mystery, the absolute mystery. So there's been a real annual photographic effort from Florida to the Bay of Fundy and now beyond to the Gulf of St. Lawrence since 1980. And we actually have photographs dating back in the catalog, which is housed at the New England Aquarium in Boston. They have photographs dating back all the way to 1935. And from those photographs, we've been able to piece together the life history. So this was sort of like early Facebook for right whales. So every time we photograph a right whale, it was like, posting a message. And so that whale would tell us a little bit something was where it was and who it was with. So 40 years later, we still don't know the wintering ground for a lot of the animals. Mothers and calves are off of southeast Florida, but the males, the juveniles, and the females that aren't giving birth, because they only give birth at best every 3 years, more realistically every 6 to 10, they're all somewhere else in the wintertime. So there's still many mysteries. We think there's another summer nursery somewhere than what was in the Bay of Fundy, but now the whales have actually left the Bay of Fundy due to climate change. And they've gone to the Gulf of St. Lawrence, but only half the whales are in the Gulf of St. Lawrence. From those 400 photographed, well-cataloged whales, only about half of them go to the Gulf of St. Lawrence. So we still have incredible mystery about this animal. And, it's simply the one that needs the most help.
Yeah. Sean, Patrick, Gretchen, what are your takes?
Well, I'd say
why this creature?
Yeah, I'd say in addition to Mo, who I'm just realizing we met on a research vessel in the Bay of Fundy about 25 years ago.
Years ago.
And
You were both about 5 years old.
Exactly.
Like yeah.
Mo hasn't changed. But in addition to what she's shared about how little we know, as with its ocean habitat, how little we know about right whales and our beginning, thanks to the efforts of a number of people on this panel and a range of scientists up and down the east coast of North America that are working hard to better understand and protect this species. In addition to those incredible facts of these animals that are following their ancient migratory pathways up and down our eastern coast, whales generally, and the right whale perhaps particularly because it has been a close neighbor over many generations for us here in North America on the East Coast. These are creatures of myth and story with a powerful impact, I dare say, on human consciousness. Whales kind of swim through, and not just for full-time whale huggers like us, but the first creature mentioned in Hebrew scripture, Genesis 1:21, and God created the great whales. Primitive peoples, cave drawings, et cetera, et cetera. There's been this connection and marveling at something, a species much larger than our own, that early was sort of inextricably bound with U.S. And colonial economic prosperity. Whale oil lit the lamps of the Western world, as Mo has indicated. And now to come to a point where the story's being told that Nick Hawkins, that Nadine, and that you yourself, Latif, in first learning about this, are bringing all of our attention, using your artistic talents, bringing all of our attention to the plight of this ancient species in a really powerful way. And I've never seen that done better than The Last of the Right Whales. And it really does touch something inside and invite action. These whales are now not dying from whaling. They're not dying of old age. They're dying because we continue to kill them through entanglement in particular kinds of fishing gear, as the film highlights, and through collisions with high-speed vessels. So our efforts on an ongoing basis are multiplied and turbocharged by powerful communications and visualization that Nadine, Nick, yourself, and other committed people from different sectors are bringing to this. You're convening us in a way for good discussions and sharings with the public, and hopefully this will help catalyze additional focus and awareness, because we all need to be part of the solution for protecting these species for future generations.
Yeah. Sean and Gretchen, do you want to weigh in? Just like what is it about this particular creature that has grabbed you, and why?
Go ahead, Gretchen.
Thanks, John. I mean, I guess, yeah, the whales kind of grabbed us. As Mo mentioned, the whales are there in coastal communities, and we work a lot with people in coastal communities, whether they're trying to protect the ocean or they work in tourism and fishing. And some of the activities that are happening in coastal environments are impacting those whales. And I will say some of the key volunteers and leaders in the club who had a sneak peek of the film, I mean, we left that film crying. There just is that connection to the whale and what it means if we, as one of the wealthiest, well, two of the wealthiest nations on Earth, can't protect this species. And it just brings to light so many of the issues with the ocean, and in a more positive sense, what we can do about that. And I think the fact that the whale persists and keeps trying with us gives me hope. And also, obviously, the work highlighted in the film and then the beautiful connections shown in the film really should give us hope that we can do our best. And the whale keeps knocking on our ocean doors, so let's clear the way for them. And
I'll everything everyone's been saying here. Let me just add a little bit to it. These are Right whales are bizarrely beautiful creatures. They are bizarre looking. A lot of people don't understand if they're looking at the front or the back or the up or the down. They can't tell. And if you're used to seeing whales in general, and then you see a right whale, you're like, what is it I'm looking at? You don't know what you're looking at. Is it upside down? Is it flat? Because it's so fat, this thing looks like it's flat. So they're very unusual looking. Anyone should make an effort to try and see these things if you can, safely and sustainably, of course. You know, we know, and then there's a tremendous attention. There's a lot of scientists working on whales and on the right whales. And we continue to find things that are amazing. Just this last year, there was a bit of research that came out where someone started analyzing all the bumps and moans and grunts and oinks that this thing makes. And then they were like, wait a minute, this isn't a pattern. And they started to realize they're actually singing. And we didn't even notice that until someone now has started to look at it. These things are singing in the ocean. So it's fascinating. The only other point I want to make that makes them so fascinating is that these animals, as Mo described, has, you know, suffered because of our history, but now they're suffering because of our willful ignorance. We just don't give them the attention, and we're killing them by accident because we think we have the right to use the ocean the way we use it. And this is, you know, we teach our children not to act like this in the house and to look after things, and we've got to live up to that responsibility and stop being that way. And the right whales are the ones that are at the front of the line. There are many other whales in the ocean. All of them are suffering from these transgressions of ignorance and like a child running with a knife. And we need to step up to that responsibility and solve it. And we can demonstrate that by working on right whales right now.
To jump off of the first point you made, and the singing, like I would love to hear more, just more about their behavior, their social lives. Like what like. Tell me a few of those details that really like that can help me fall in love with this thing the same way that all of you seem to have.
Well, this is exactly what I look for from Mo a lot, because she has no doubt spent the most time with these whales and can describe them best.
Well, you know, I'll just, when you're all the way out in Calgary and you're surrounded by land and you don't have much ocean, but you do have the prairies, and when you look across, to some, it's not a great, it's a boring view. And to others, it's the most beautiful thing in the world. When you're out on the ocean, when you're, let's say, in a right whale habitat, you're looking at the surface of the ocean. There might be a bird or something flying. But, you know, it's kind of a desert until something breaks the surface. And when that whale comes up and you see that big V-shaped blow, and then they're flat back, they don't have a dorsal fin, their back is like a table. They'll surface a few times and then show beautiful high flukes, triangular shape, and down to the bottom to feed. And so this is an animal that's 17, 18 meters long, you know, 50, 55 feet for older people like us. They weigh 50, 60 tons. The calves, when they're born, weigh a ton, and they're probably 3, 4 meters long. So this is a big whale. And it's making its living on plankton. So pretty low down on the food chain. So it's a grazer. And just to give it a little more cachet, I like to compare it to perhaps a bison rather than a cow. But it's a grazer. So it's you know, it's out there grazing the ocean. Now, in all their habitat areas, we see a behavior that we call surface active groups. And this is a social group where if you're really privileged to spend some time with these animals, you'll see a single female lying upside down. And she's making calls. It doesn't really sound like singing. It's more of an up call that I will not try to imitate.
Oh, please try to imitate.
Whoop.
Okay.
And she's making that call pretty continuously. And on our research boat, we have seen males doing what we call racing dives. So this is not a fast animal. We're talking, you know, 3, 4 knots, 5 knots of speed. It's a slow moving whale. But when we've seen a male swimming at the surface, 9, 10 knots, a bow wave in front of its head, and it just flukes and surfaces, it's clearly on a mission. We've followed those animals sometimes 3, 4 miles, 5 miles beyond our sight in our small boats. and seen them join a big social group. So you have a single female lying upside down. She's vocalizing. The males are all jockeying around her to get a chance to mate with her when she rolls over to breathe. And I've seen over my time of doing this study, I can remember one whale in particular named Gemini. He was a pretty young male, and he'd be on the periphery, kind of looking and seeing, kind of how figuring it all out. And now he's what we call an alpha male, right in there beside the female, ready to mate with her. Except we don't know when the female comes into heat. We do know that most of the calves are born December, January, early February. And we guess that the pregnancy period is about 12 to 13 months, but that's based on whaling data for southern right whales, again, before biologists existed. So we figure the actual mating time must be November, December, early January, a time when we actually don't know where a lot of the right whales are. We thought we had a mating area found in what's called Jordan Basin, which is the central Gulf of Maine. And the minute the paper got published, the whales stopped showing up. So I think the mating area is really where you get the right combination of whales aggregating, perhaps to feed at that time of the year. So a lot of exciting behavior. To be with one of those mating groups is just unreal. The sounds of the blows and just the energy, and to see the whales jockey for position. They're so flexible. This fat whale is so flexible, it can take it can hit its head with its tail. And you'll see footage like that in the film. You can see the flexibility of these animals. So they are, once they finally come to the surface and show themselves to you, it is an incredible show.
This Mo has not only demonstrated her incredible grasp of the biology and the fascinating behaviors of the whale, but she's also explained the strong sexual content rating that has been given to the last of the right whales. But joking aside,
whale calves can't watch it alone. Yeah.
But joking aside, one thing in addition to being fascinating in its own right, one thing that this highlights is there is a need to alter our behavior, human behavior, whether on the coast as a mariner or a fisher, or sitting by the river in Calgary, where plastic waste might be going into the river that ultimately is flowing downstream into the global ocean. We do need to mitigate those human threats. These activities are important. There are technology and regulatory solutions that are at hand, which is exciting. But the mating is key to the survival of the species. And in years when no calves are born, but whales are killed through entanglement and ship strike or vessel strike, because we know now it's not just big ships. There are smaller vessels that are also being implicated in some of these tragic deaths. Without a robust cohort each year of right whale calves, we're not going to save this animal, which faces a sea of troubles. And there are only 360 of these animals left. Scientists, Sean, Mo, and others tell us if more than one right whale dies per year, the trajectory of the species, its slide toward extinction accelerates. So it's both mitigating the human threats, mitigating our activities, so we're not threatening right whales as much, but also giving these animals space and safety so that they can continue their exciting mating behaviors, but also birthing new calves.
Well, I do obviously want to talk a lot about the challenges they're facing, the fact that they're sort of on the brink. But before I do, I still want to talk just a little bit more about them, kind of like who they are and what they do. Like, are there other things that either you've seen or read about or heard or that these right whales do that when you tell people they're like, what, really, they could do that, or that you yourself were like, no, they can do that? What are the sort of the surprising little habits or behaviors or relationships that you've seen that that they have like that?
I'll add a few to the pile. We can keep the list going. These things swim through the water with a giant mouth open, pushing it through the water in order to feed on tiny little bugs in the ocean. We don't know how they find the bugs, but they do. We don't know how that, well, we know how they got so much power. They're extremely strong. And as Mo said, they have a giant tail that lets them push through the water when they swim this way. They feed at depths of up to 200, well over 200 feet is for sure what they can get to, and sometimes much, much deeper. They tend to maximize the energy that they're looking for when they're feeding down there. They know where the bugs are down deep. They can feed at the surface as well. It's we don't even know how or why they do a lot of these things or how they do it. They're fascinating. And to watch this and to know that they're doing it is even more fascinating as well. You get to witness mixing in the ocean, where all of a sudden the whales will be feeding at depth and then they come up to the surface and then there's whale poop everywhere around you because that's what they've been feeding on. So you're watching ocean processes with these whales.
What does that smell like? Have you been close to that?
Fish. I mean, that's what it smells like. They're not eating fish, but that's what it smells like to me anyway. Mo's probably got more experience with it than I.
It smells like poop. It's very, very strong. Like really, really strong.
Yeah, I had a chance to sample that myself. It does smell quite powerful.
It smells like productivity.
And
good for the ocean.
To what Sean was saying, like the feeding behavior that he was just describing, skim feeding at the surface, we were able to film that in Cape Cod, and that is the most phenomenal thing I've ever seen. Like when you know the size of the animal and that mouth wide open, the amount of force they still need to be able to exert to move through the water while they've got all that drag, it's incredible to watch. And it's really the only time that I felt like I had a good handle on the physiology of the whale, because you could see everything, you could see the eye. I mean, the thing that always throws me off is the mouth is kind of like upturned, so it's like an upside down smile, and then the eyes are at the bottom of the mouth. And so you could really get your bearing because the mouth was wide open, it turned right on its side, and you can see everything. It's just, they're incredible animals. And the other thing I'll just add that really struck me filming the whales is, I think it was the best thing we captured. We woke up one morning, it was dead calm, beautiful sunlight, and there was a surface active group literally almost, right beside our boat. It was incredible. And the mating behavior that Mo described is there, but there's also very gentle behavior. There was a young calf there. There was 2 females on their back. So one was cradling her calf and the other one, I guess, was calling out for males, but it's almost like hugging. You'll see the fin go over, the dorsal fin go over one side, the pectoral fin, or then you'll see them rub each other with their tails. It's really incredible.
And is it hugging? Like, what are they doing? Why do they do that? How does that? Yeah.
Feels good. They're very tactile.
Yeah. I mean, just like any wild animal nurturing its young, right? You really see this a lot in Florida. You'll see, the calf lying all over the mother lying upside down with her flippers, sort of out around the calf and just staying belly to belly for quite a long time and nuzzling each other. It's part of the bonding. It's just part of adults nurturing their young. And it is really, really quite tender. The feeding that we're talking about, the only way I can describe it so that the listeners can understand, imagine trying to swim through a pool with a huge bucket attached under your chin. Right. And that's the open end of the bucket. And you're trying to swim through that with this huge drag to get your food. And we've seen them make such fine changes. So in other words, if the food's a little deeper, they'll go down a couple of centimeters, or they'll go left, or they'll go right. And we used to fly aerial surveys in Cape Cod Bay, and you could see the food at the surface, and you'd see these whales making minor adjustments. And as to what Sean said about, finding really dense food where we find whales, scientists have never found dense concentrations of plankton without finding the whales first. We don't know how they find their food, and we sure as heck can't find it ourselves. Wow. Even if we're in like a place that's pretty small, like Cape Cod Bay, we have to find the whales to find out where the best food is.
Huh.
So always go to a restaurant where there's a lineup.
Yeah, right. No kidding. And a seafood restaurant in particular sounds like why, and that image is so beautiful that you said about the sort of belly to belly. Why do they take so long to have babies? Like what is the limiting factor there? Like why aren't they just looking around being like, there's not a lot of us, and just churning more out?
Raising kids is expensive and emotionally stressful and
God,
a
that's
large
so
investment
relatable.
and complicated.
One ton baby.
Yeah, and so, you know, I mean, I'm only half being facetious here, you know, that the investment, the females, once they give birth, well, pardon me, let's go back. First, they grow a calf inside their body, and then they push it out somehow that I don't even understand. Then they don't even eat for 6 to 8 months, maybe 6 months anyway, and they constantly create high energy milk that they feed the calf. By the time the calf is weaned and no longer a part of the mom, the mom is depleted. And, you know, Mo is describing these dry skins. They're just nothing left to them. And it takes years to recover from that. Typically 2 to 3 years when life is good for these whales. And recently, the research has shown that these whales are actually taking 6 or 7 years between having calves, presumably because they are expending so much energy or having difficulty getting the energy they need to invest and grow yet another calf, you know? So it is a very difficult ordeal to watch and understand the life cycle of a right whale mom, of almost any whale mom that's trying to raise a calf. And it takes time to recover from that and regain those investments, you know?
That's particularly true. What Sean highlights there is particularly true today, because we know that temperature changes in the North Atlantic, where that body of water is warming at a much faster rate due to climate change than pretty much any other body of water in the world. And as a result, in a search for their foodstuffs seasonally, for these little copepods, the bugs in the water, as Sean was calling them, these animals are going further and further north into their range. So the longer the migration, the energetics are such that these mommy whales or prospective mommy whales are putting out a lot more energy than had previously been required. And if they are not fit and are struggling for their own survival, it's unreasonable then to expect that there's going to be robust population growth. So it's a sort of vicious cycle that underneath the surface of all this, climate change and what we are doing to the planet through other human activities is having a devastating effect on the marine environment and species that, like our own, depend on a healthy ocean.
Mm-hmm. And the mom calf pair that we followed over a year and a half in the film, Snow Cone and her calf, that was her first calf at age 15. So the sexual maturity is being delayed as well. And scientists are thinking that has to do with, you know, availability of food and also the stressors that they're dealing with entanglements and ship strikes. And we talked earlier about, you know, even small boats being a danger for these animals. Well, 3 calves were killed by small boats while we were making this film.
Wow. Yeah. Well, let's go there then, I guess. I do. A few people raised sort of earlier this point that I think is, is sort of striking that it's not like we used to target them. They were the right whale to kill, and almost became extinct. But now that it's like there's something so much less. It's so much less dignified that they're not even dying because we're killing them. They're dying sort of as a knock-on effect or something, as a kind of like barely considered, you know, side effect. That is like, yeah, I don't know, that point really strikes me. It's like there's something. It's not even a dignified way to die in a way. It's like a really it's really there's something very there's something very irresponsible about that. I know. So in the film, there is that there's the kind of saga of this distraught whale number 4615 that gets entangled. Nadine, can you just tell us that story? Take us back to that day.
Yeah, well, that was on our last shoot, so July in the Gulf of St. Lawrence this year. We were actually with Mo filming at that time. And what I described earlier about the social active group when we woke up, beautiful sunrise, that all happened in the same day. So we saw what could be for these whales, you know, what they are when we are not interfering with them. And then 10 hours later, we came upon 4615, and it was the drone operator, Frederick Jones, who saw the whale through his drone. And it took him, because he doesn't have the familiarity that Mo or some of the other people on the panel do with seeing, it took him a while to figure out what was going on, because the whale was moving so uncharacteristically, so thrashing is the only way to describe it. And so, you know, he notified us, because I was on Mo's boat, so Mo and her team, and then they immediately switched from their research mode into rescue mode.
Yeah, and Mo, how often do you do these? How does it usually go?
Well, while we've been sitting here, the whale rescue team actually just put all the gear in the truck and left to go attend to an entangled sea turtle.
Oh, wow.
So we are like a volunteer fire department. We're on standby all the time, and we get calls. Last year, our last whale rescue call was December 21st for that calendar year. So we get them all the time. Seeing one while we're out in the middle of a research trip has happened before in the Gulf. It's happened a couple of times, actually, but this one was a little bit different in that we actually photographed this whale at noontime, and it was not entangled. And we had photographed it the day before, and it wasn't entangled. And at 4:30 in the afternoon is when Nadine's drone operator started to see this whale that, instead of just coming to the surface and swimming along and showing its tail, it was lying at the surface still, and then it would just thrash like crazy. And when we got there, we saw that it had rope over its head and through its mouth, and 4 body wraps from the neck going down towards the tail. And so we actually attached a satellite monitored tag to the trailing gear, because there was quite a lot of rope trailing behind the whale. And that was just to try and help us relocate it, because the weather, of course, was going to be closing in that night. So we knew we weren't going to get a chance. And even during the time that we watched it, up until the sun set at about 9:30 or 10 o'clock at night, it was working, that thrashing was working those body wraps down towards the tail. And we see a lot of whales where the leading edge of their tails is all roughened and scarred. And that's what this whale had from a previous entanglement. It also it was opening old wounds, I guess is the best way to say it during this. So it was seen the next morning by an aircraft, and it had actually shed all the body wraps. And when we saw it thrashing and slashing, it was the flukes of it almost came together, and it was almost like it was trying to make a skinny tail for the rope to get pulled from. In putting on the satellite telemetry buoy, we probably added a little bit of drag to it. We don't know if it helped it or not. Unfortunately, the tag stopped transmitting. The whale did hit the tag a bunch of times, sort of intentionally kind of booting it out of the way. So it took a little bit of a beating. So the last time the whale was seen, it still had rope in its mouth, but it didn't have any more body wraps. And so we've learned a little bit about how these whales get out of the gear on their own. Mysteriously, 2 months later, the tag started transmitting again a couple days ago. And this time it's north of Prince Edward Island. We'd put the tag on about 40 miles east of Shippagan, New Brunswick. The tag has transmitted a little bit. The transmissions are not great, and it has actually stopped again. So Fisheries and Oceans Canada has teams either in the air or on a boat today to go out and try and find the tag and see what's going on. It looks like the tag's just drifting. So it looks like
the tag is just by itself.
Yeah, that's what it looks like from what we're seeing. A little too early to tell, but that's what it looks like. And so all of this goes to say, first of all, there are an awful lot of mariners. I've never met a single mariner, whether on a ship or on a fishing boat, that wants to harm a whale. These are accidents, and they are a result of fishermen going about their way to make a living, the shipping industry going about their way to make a living. Up in Canada, with the measures that are put in place, we really have good compliance. There's a lot of mariners trying to solve this problem. For all of us sitting here on this call, there's so many people behind us, both in the field, in science, conservation groups, biologists, environmental groups that are really trying hard. No one's given up on this whale. Everyone's rolling up their sleeves and trying to come up with new ways to fish, slowing ships down, encouraging compliance and getting compliance. The Canadian government is enforcing compliance with speed limits to reduce the risk of ship strikes. So there is a huge amount of effort going on for this whale. And that doesn't mean every Canadian can't help. Every Canadian can help because we need to take care of our oceans. And that even starts with a fresh body of water in the middle of Canada in the prairies. So it really behooves all of us to just take extra care, pick up the bottles, just keep a cleaner house outside of your own house in waters and streams and ponds and lakes that end up in the ocean.
Yeah.
And talk about it as well, and make sure people know that we want a society that looks after our wildlife as well as our use of the ocean as well. Like, making those tough decisions is going to be important.
Yeah, and I guess I would add to that. I mean, when I said the whales came to us, we were fighting oil drilling in the Gulf of St. Lawrence when the big mortality and the sad deaths of the whales started happening in 2017 at really high rates, and the whales had moved there. And I think we also have to start thinking seriously, and I think there's a sense out there now with the urgency on climate change that we're going to start switching, because the Gulf of St. Lawrence is a threatened ecosystem in and of itself. And as has been mentioned, where would they go next? And fortunately, we've been successful in stopping the drilling from happening there. And drilling is often prefaced by seismic blasting, which introduces huge amounts of noise into the ocean environment, which would not be sustainable for all the beautiful behaviors that you've just been hearing about for those whales. So, stopping drilling in our oceans and tackling climate change is a piece of the solution for this species and many others, but particularly this one, which is really on the knife's edge.
Well, and it seems particularly so because of I didn't know this phrase. So what is an unusual mortality event? What does that mean? I mean, this is clearly maybe I'll just put that out there.
And I didn't want to use it, I'll be honest.
Why? Yeah.
Because it's sort of putting a technical term on something that is, it's about the deaths of these individual beautiful animals. But probably Mo and Sean can speak to why that term was used 2017 onward.
Sure.
I mean, I'll quickly answer. It's actually mostly a technical government term that characterizes the situation. Otherwise, it's a fairly bland description of what happened, and perhaps an understatement of what happened as well. But it mostly refers to a government program in the U.S. that deals with these kinds of events on an official level. But it is also a fairly technical sounding description of what we saw.
But it's just a way to flag we're in an acute emergency here.
And we've got to put resources and attention towards figuring out why it's occurring. It's not an unusual, there are several unusual mortality events that have occurred and are continuing to occur in this continent as well with other marine mammals too. So it's not a unique situation for the right whales.
Right.
But it really made governments sit up and take notice, and people sit up and take notice, just because the state of the population is so low, and they were doing something different. They were in a different environment that was.
How many are there? How many right whales or North Atlantic right whales, or how many are we talking about?
About
We're looking at a whole species that comprises about 360 animals. This year there were 18 calves born, so you could add 18. But there's also what we call cryptic mortality, and that is mortality where we don't see the carcasses. These animals do float after death, but they only float after death if it's a healthy animal. If it's an animal that has been compromised in its ability to feed and is thin, it's not going to float after death. So cryptic mortality adds a high enough percentage to what we actually see to cause us even greater alarm and also just more urgency in not taking 10 years to solve this problem.
Right.
We need to solve it now.
And it doesn't have any predators or anything like that. It's just us and our rope lines and our climate change making it harder to eat, and it's us. We're the
predator.
We're the predator.
And ocean noise. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, and that well. So let's kind of go, because it so much of the and I think it was even in the trailer. So much of this is about rope, is about being entangled and getting entangled, and then there is like one of the things that I had never heard of that I saw in the film is this new kind of like ropeless fishing gear. I did not know such a thing existed. I don't know who knows the most about that, but I'd love to know like how does it work, sort of pluses, minuses of it, whether it's ready for prime time or whether it's sort of just an experimental new thing.
I'll quickly describe it. To be able to fish in the ocean, if you're going to put a trap on the bottom of the ocean, you got to go back and find it. You also want people to know where it is so that they don't put a trap on top of your trap too. So having a buoy at the surface is what's needed, and you attach that to a rope that's connected to whatever it is you put on the bottom. This term ropeless fishing is maybe better described as on-demand fishing. And the idea is that instead of having a buoy line that persists in the water column that marks your location, that allows you to pull it up onto your boat, you have it held at depth, or you have another mechanism that will lift it to the surface rather than having to pull it up by a rope. So this is what refers to as ropeless systems. It's, this is...
So the rope we're talking about specifically is like there's a net or a trap or whatever at the bottom, there's a buoy at the top, and it's the rope connecting those two things.
That's it. Same technology we've been using to fish lobsters for 400 years. It hasn't changed. That's how we do it. And that's all that it is. And so ropeless fishing has been used even in the scientific community, in the oceanographic community, for decades now. We put expensive pieces of equipment at the bottom of the ocean and somehow get it back to the surface. So it's not new, it's not unusual. What it's not been tested for very much, except by the fishing industry and a growing number of people in the fishing industry, is whether or not it's suitable for use in a commercial fishery, which is extremely dangerous, very fast, has to be able to catch fish, and has to be able to make money. And so this strange new mechanism, it needs to insert itself into something that's 400, 500, 1,000 years old in terms of how to catch stuff and bring stuff up from the bottom of the ocean. And so in a sense, it is kind of science fiction. In another sense, it's it's not anything new. What it takes is a figuring out about how to fit it into this pre-existing scheme and make it work for these commercial fish harvesters.
And in some places they have done that successfully, right, Sean? Like in Australia, and I think since 2012 have they been using it commercially there?
That's right. So it's not something that's unheard of. Even within here in North America, we've got people who've done some commercial fishing with ropeless gear here in Canada as well. And there's a couple of different attitudes to it, and I'll mention it quickly. Is many people are saying that ropeless fishing is the solution to these entanglement problems. The motto that I always use, and people are getting tired of hearing, is preventing traditional fishing from areas where whales exist. That's the solution to preventing entanglements. Ropeless gear is a solution to those closures. This allows an opportunity for fish harvesters to fish in areas that would be too dangerous for whales with traditional gear. So it's not necessarily that we need to convert our fisheries to this new ropeless gear. What we need to do is give them a new tool that allows them to fish safely around whales. And that's what ropeless gear is. It's not a wholesale conversion of the fishery, nor is it even ready for that kind of thing, as you were just suggesting, Latif. It's still in a lot of developmental stages, but it's a tool we're going to have, and it's a tool that we need to be able to use as well.
One of the participants in the film is a fisher that is in the Gulf of St. Lawrence, a snow crab fisherman, Martin Noel, and he's been testing with Sean different applications, different models of this gear for several years now. And he even goes out with a scientist. So he was the captain on the boat when we came across that entangled whale we were speaking about earlier, 4615. And Martin has started, along with other fishermen, the first rescue team or disentanglement team in the region. And so the fishermen are very engaged in looking for solutions and have been working with scientists and engineers. And so we're pushing toward that time when these solutions will be available for the right fisheries in the right places, when the whales are present. And the more the public knows about it and can support government action to try and give support for that kind of transitioning, that's really what we're all hoping for.
That was one of the I think one of the real strengths of the film is like I think it's, you know, there's no bad guy here. Like this is a problem that we're all coming to the table together, that we all need to come to the table. This is a sort of wicked problem that we need to all sit together and tackle together, because otherwise it's just not going to get solved.
Yeah. It is an interesting migration, Latif, that you know, for most of human history, one of the main challenges was protecting ourselves from the wild beasts. And now in so many areas, whether terrestrial or marine, the challenge is to protect these wild species from human activities. And the race is on by the organizations represented on this panel, other stakeholders, government at both the federal, provincial, and state level down here in the lower 48, as we call it. The race is on to identify solutions that, as Mo and Sean have outlined, allow animals and people to thrive and coastal communities to thrive. Fishermen need access to traditional fishing areas in order to continue to make their living from the sea. Mariners are navigating their vessels sometimes in very challenging situations, most particularly in the Gulf of St. Lawrence, where some of the challenges there for navigation, both in terms of distance and whale habitat, are much more challenging than mariners face down in the U.S. Arming these committed fishermen and mariners, and some of the most compelling advocates for protection of this species and protection of their ocean habitat, are people that are making their living from the sea. That's why they're there. They are dependent firsthand on a healthy ecosystem and on protecting a species that, if it continues to decline, threatens to shut down fisheries throughout its range, at least seasonally, which has grave economic consequences for coastal communities. Working together with mariners, with fishermen, is so well highlighted in The Last of the Right Whales, is really the path. It's not easy, but it is the critical path toward making change in the water that gives these animals a fighting chance. And I think that's why each of our organizations were so proud to be able to collaborate with Nadine and the team in putting together this visionary film. And hopefully it and our own ongoing efforts, which again are turbocharged by incredible creative products like this film, can create a sort of ripple effect. I can't get away from these stupid metaphors, but create a ripple effect that encourages change up and down the range of the North Atlantic right whale, and in our own behaviors as consumers, as conservation advocates, as voters. One final migration that I would note as an American on this panel, and that is, as some of my Canadian colleagues may be well aware, there's a tendency down here in the US to point the finger, and when government regulators come or others to say, no, this is a Canada problem. Look at all those whales that are getting hit by vessels in Canada, and oh, those Canadian fishermen, and blah, 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 blah. This is not an American problem. Go and talk to them. In truth, and I have heard this from fishermen that we are working with down here off Cape Cod and in southern New England, Canada, which didn't have to contend with the sustained presence of right whales in the northernmost part of their range over the last decade or so, only very recently has this shift been made as far as we understand the science. Canada has responded very nimbly and very quickly, and there are strong examples of where DFO, the Department of Fisheries and Oceans, communities involved, fishermen involved, mariners involved, have accelerated, and in many areas now are at least keeping pace with, and in some important areas, including Ropeless, are outpacing and leading the effort, which needs to involve both countries, because these species don't stop at the border, whether because of COVID or passport issues. These species are dependent on a range that involves both of our coasts. So just a tip of the hat to the efforts of my colleagues here, but also the Canadian government with whom they are working. Canada has made some real progress and is now leading the way in some important issues on these, in some important issues that are fundamental to the saving of this species.
Well, we still need to do more, I would say, but that is.
And I'd say congratulations to the U.S. to starting to make some good choices for saving this species as well. So
yeah.
Well, I think I like that note to end on, which is that we are like everybody need, this is all hands on deck kind of an issue, which and I think that's how we gotta work from now on. But so we've gone an hour, so we have to stop there. Thank you so much, Nadine, Gretchen, Patrick, Sean, Mo, for talking to me today. The website with more information is lastoftherightvales.com. They're also on social media at Last Right Whales, where you can learn more about screenings and how to help the whales. Watch the film if you haven't already. And if you have, tell your friends. And if any of your friends are right whales, urge them to procreate. I am Latif Nasser. Thank you for joining us, and take care.
Pleasure to meet you. Nice to see you all.
Yes, watch the film.